Guys, this is Jake from the FPV Academy YouTube channel. I hope you guys all are having a good day. Thank you so much for joining the stream. This is actually my first stream that I'm doing in maybe, I think, 6 years. So bear with me. This is hopefully the first of many more to come, but I'm really excited to be running through this with you guys. If there are any issues with audio or with volume levels, if the music's too loud or anything, please let me know. I would happily make some changes. I haven't tested the audio levels, but everything looks okay on my end. But if there's anything that comes up, please just let me know in the chat. Also, as we are going through the Powerloop today, I would love it if you guys ask questions. That's kind of what this is about. I will be flying on liftoff and I will be creating a lobby. So if you have liftoff and you want to, join in on that, please go ahead and do so. It'll be an open lobby and, we can have an additional 5 people in there. So feel free to join on there if you are keen to do that. Before we start though, I think it's probably just important to take one step back and just maybe recap what this video is about exactly. So I'm switching over to a web browser here. And basically where this all starts is with this video that I just published over on the FPV Academy YouTube channel. So if you haven't seen it before, I'd highly recommend you go and have a look. I'll quickly play a small snippet of it, but this is basically what we will be covering, all the content in here and kind of just reiterating a few of those things and, answering questions you guys may have and just going a bit more in depth. So this is the video. How you can improve your power loops and how you can practice it in the Liftoff FPV simulator. Angle. So we don't have to watch the whole video, but at the baseline, this is definitely something that I would recommend you guys have a look at. It will be super helpful with just understanding the power loop. The biggest thing is just understanding where those points are that you need to look out for as you're going through the power loop, where it transitions from the one section to the next. But yeah, I would definitely go and have a look at this video. Just search for that and then have a look when you're done with this. So jumping back into Liftoff, let's resume the music from there. Jumping back into Liftoff, I mean, Liftoff is an amazing simulator. There are so many cool things that you can do with sims. I highly recommend anybody that before you go and try and actually do a new trick outdoors, definitely do it on the simulator multiple times, as it will make it a lot easier for you and you will be much less likely to actually crash. So let's also talk about camera angle. This is one thing I just want to address before we kind of start the actual flying. I had a few comments on that last video over the last few days where guys were saying, look, 50 to 60 degrees is a pretty high camera angle. And if you have watched the video, you'll know that I mentioned in there that I recommend when you do more advanced FPV freestyle that the camera angle is a little bit higher. I know there are many guys that, they prefer 25 to 35, maybe up to 40 degrees, and that's great. But I do feel like a lot of the more advanced FPV maneuvers, you do need to have a higher camera angle. And the reason for that is simple. I'll just show you guys again here real quick. Let me pull up this close-up camera. So I've got my 7-inch long-range quad. My other quad, 5 inches, currently needs to be fixed. So let's just use this one. But as you can see, the camera angle on this is pretty much close to 0, okay? And basically the direction your quad's pointing, that's what you're seeing. So you always want to be able to look a little bit forward. This camera angle over here, we're sitting close to 30 degrees. And if I have to level that out, this is the angle at which the quad is, and this is the angle at which the camera, you can look ahead. And this isn't very helpful because when you go invert it, your quad is kind of still, sorry, my Tyrannus is talking to me. The quad's still kind of facing down. If you had to throttle, it will still fly down a lot more than if the camera angle was a little bit higher. And you can't really see that far ahead. You have to bring your quad around a lot more to be able to see where you're going. Whereas if your camera angle is quite a lot higher, let's push this up to about 50 to 60 degrees, which I mentioned on the video, the FPV camera angle sweet spot, then you can look forward a lot more. And yes, there are a lot of things that kind of also results from this. Yaw and roll, kind of, you have to fly your quad a little bit different, and it takes some getting used to, but almost all of the advanced maneuvers become a lot easier when this camera angle is higher. It becomes more difficult to fly the quad, especially at lower speeds, because you can't really see that much. But if you haven't ever flown it at this angle, definitely do it on the FPV, the Liftoff FPV simulator, because it might open a whole new world for you in FPV. With the Powerloop kind of being an intermediate to more advanced maneuver, I would recommend, you know, pushing this camera angle up, especially in Powerloop variations, proximity Powerloops, or there are many other Powerloops that you can do, but it makes it easier when this camera angle is up. So that's just one thing to consider. Definitely try that if you haven't before. So let's jump back onto the Liftoff FPV simulator, and let's open up a lobby and take it from there. You can feel free to join, as I mentioned, so I'll just create one here. And as I mentioned on that video, there aren't any, I haven't created a track to specifically practice this. I mean, we could, but there are so many cool things that you can Powerloop on all of the different maps that they have. So let's just use one of those maps and see what we can Powerloop on this. So I'll be creating this room, feel free to join in. And I'll be starting it up. So I'm just using a Tyrannus, my old school, I think from 2019, still does an awesome job, works great for me. Let's jump into it. So before we go, let's just look at the camera angle. So you can use your arrows up and down to adjust that. My default camera angle is set to 60 degrees. Let's drop that down to 55 for this section of the video, and let's get started. So if you recall, if you have watched the video, there are different things that you can look at when you are doing the Powerloop, which kind of tells you where you are. I won't do Powerloops yet, I'll just do some free flying as I'm talking. There are different things that you can look at as you are flying around, especially in the Powerloop, that tells you kind of where you are and when you need to transition. What I found is the problem with Powerloops are to consistently get it right, that you know you transition from the punch as you're punching into the Powerloop, you transition into the float. A lot of people, like I specifically didn't do that there to show you what happens. A lot of people don't always get that right because I didn't punch it enough there. It's not consistent, or they maybe do it for too long and they punch it too much and they overshoot it a ton. So that's kind of the main problem with Powerloops, is knowing where you are in the Powerloop and when to transition between punching to get through it, into the float, and into the catch at the bottom again to shoot through it. So let's do a quick recap on what the four kind of sections of a Powerloop is. So let's find a good object to Powerloop. Let's use this crane over here. Okay, so that middle crane, that's the one we will be using. So in your approach, this is the approach. It's the part where you are approaching the object that you want to Powerloop. Okay, so I'll just be flying under this one. But the approach is how you approach the object you want to Powerloop. And there are two things that you need to take into consideration when you are approaching the object you want to Powerloop. So the first one is that if this is the object we want to Powerloop, you don't want to be rolled to the right as you're flying through it, or rolled to the left. Because if you initiate a Powerloop like this, it is going to throw you off completely to the side. So you have to be completely level with the ground as you're approaching through the Powerloop. Yes, many times you do have to do a last minute adjustment to get straight, but you cannot initiate the Powerloop unless you are completely level with the ground. You cannot be rolled to the right, you cannot be rolled to the left. You have to be completely level with the ground. So let me show you why that is and what happens again. So I'll be rolled a little bit to the left, and then I'm initiating my power loop, and you will see that it's thrown me off completely to the left. So that's why it's important to stay level as you are approaching the power loop. The next thing that you need to take into consideration in the approach is kind of the angle you want to power loop. So I want to power loop this object exactly so I can go back into it, kind of hit it at a 90-degree angle. So if this is our angle that we want to maybe, this is the angle that we, what am I saying? Talking about angles, don't know what I want to say, but you kind of just, if you come in from an angle, let's say that's the object, and you come in from this angle and you power loop it, then you're going to power loop it, sideways, and you don't maybe want to do that. The angle that you want to power loop it at is to approach at a 90-degree angle of the object you want to power loop. That's why I mentioned angle. So if you are coming in from this angle and you wanted to actually power loop it a different way, it's gonna, if you look at where I am, it's sideways. You're not gonna actually hit it straight. So it's important, those are the two things to keep into consideration, take into consideration, is to approach level and approach it at a 90-degree angle, unless you want to have a bit of flair, maybe doing it, a sideways power loop over the object like that. So that's the approach. Now, moving on from the approach is the second part of the power loop. And the second part of the power loop is the punch. Once you go through, you punch to be able to clear it. Now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, if you don't punch it hard enough, let's get to this section over here. So Drone On has joined us. Welcome Drone On to the lobby. If you don't punch it long enough and you stop, you don't actually clear, okay, I barely cleared it there, but you might not actually clear the object you are power looping. See, so I didn't clear it there. And as I mentioned earlier, during the punch, if you fly and you punch it for too long, then you're going to way overshoot what you are power looping. So that transition from the approach into the punch is super important. To know when you need to stop doing your punch. So this was a revelation for me, and my power loops have become so much more consistent once I started doing this. And this only really works, this is why I mentioned the camera angle earlier, this only really works when the camera angle is at a 50 to 60 degree in that sweet spot. So let's use this section, this over here, to power loop. And so the thing you're looking at is the horizon. As you pitch back, there's the horizon. That's when you cut back and you start rolling. Okay, I cut back a bit early there and I didn't roll around, that's why you crashed. Let's get a bit of height. Let's power loop this section of the crane. Now, let's do that again. I'm gonna do this slowly. I'm gonna pitch back and I'm gonna start my punch. There's the horizon, cut back, and then bring it around. And then you will almost always have cleared the object that you are power looping. So let's do that again from this side. Under it, start my power loop. There's the horizon, cut back, cleared the object, and then catch it. So once you see the horizon, that's it. And you can do this pretty small power loop, and that should give you enough. Or you can pitch less and do a massively big power loop, and then stop. And the same thing, it's cleared it perfectly. So one other thing to take into consideration, which I also mentioned on the video, is how much pitch you apply. And if you apply more pitch, your quad is gonna do a quicker flip. The faster you pull back, the faster it's going to flip, the smaller the power loop's going to be. If you do a small or like a slower one, it's going to be a slower pitch. If you pitch back slower or less, then it's going to be a bigger power loop. So another thing to take into consideration as you are doing this power loop you want to make sure that your pitch kind of stays the same throughout the entire power loop. So look at my sticks at the bottom of the screen. Just look at what I'm doing. So this right stick, okay, the right stick that I was jiggling there, have a look at when I punch out. You'll notice that that pitch kind of stays the same throughout almost the entire power loop. So, and punch, stays there, float, stays there, into the catch, and then I catch it again. So it basically did stay the same. I didn't move my pitch at all. You only need to adjust the pitch really at the end when you catch it. And as I mentioned, the more you pitch back, the smaller the power loop's going to be. The more you pitch back, the more throttle you need to give to be able to clear it. Otherwise, it's just going to be a really small, like that, you know. But you kind of just need to find the balance on there and what you're comfortable with. So one other thing to take into consideration is, I don't know what I wanted to mention there now. Sorry about that. Okay, let's move on from the punch into the float. So now that you know when to transition at the horizon, you will go into the float and your quad's going to start falling. And the reason we transition into the float, this is what I wanted to say. The reason we transition into the float and completely cut the throttle is because if we didn't cut the throttle as we go through the power loop, the quad's going to fly down to the ground super quickly. It's going to flying up because you're fighting gravity, you're flying straight up. You're fighting gravity and it takes more effort to fly up. When you go fall down and you fly down, it's going to fall down much quicker. So the speed at which you go up on, you kind of want to try and match that as you fall back over it. And so that's why you cut your throttle, so that gravity will carry you back down again. Let's do a power loop where we don't cut the throttle and you can see the difference with what exactly happens. So let's punch forward and I'm not cutting throttle. Look how quickly and how close I got to the ground there and how quickly it went down. So that is why we have to cut back on the throttle halfway through the power loop and transition into this float. So another player, Brothers, just joined us in the lobby. Welcome, Brothers. I don't know if you're on the stream, but if you are, thank you for joining. Let's transition from the punch into the float and just talk about that a little bit more. So we know what that transition point is, and that is the horizon. So transition, cut the throttle back, and around we go. And then into the catch. Let's do it again. Wait. There. Horizon, cut back. I was a bit forward on this power loop, that's why I was quite close to the object. Cut. So I can just keep going around this over and over again. Kind of just every time when that horizon comes up, cutting back on that throttle, and it's going to clear it. So that will make your power loops so much more consistent. But again, only if your camera angle is a little bit higher. Now moving on from the float into the catch is another thing to look out for. And let's use a smaller object for this so that you can kind of see a little bit more easily what's going on. So this entry, the approach into this power loop is a little bit narrower, so it gives us a smaller target to shoot for, and it'll just make the catch a little bit easier to understand in this demonstration. So let's power loop this and I'll talk you through it. So as we're approaching, we're making sure that we are level with the level and straight, and then we punch as soon as we are under the object we want to power loop, and then when we reach the horizon we cut back into the float, and then we can transition into the catch. So for the catch, as you are floating through the air and you keep pitching up, when the entry point gets to the center of your screen again, that is when it's a good time to start powering up again. Now, because you can't exactly get the same amount of pitch on every single power loop and the same amount of throttle on every single power loop, it's not always going to be the same amount of throttle you need to give to catch yourself again. So a little bit of intuition and just general flying skills are going to come in here to ensure that you catch yourself in time to be able to go through the object you're power looping again. So K-Side just joined us as well in the lobby. Welcome, K-Side. If you're on the live stream, leave a comment. I'd love to know. So when this entry point, so this is the entry point over here, when this entry point, where I'm hovering around now, when this section reaches the center of my screen again, as I am going through the float and pointing back at where I'm power looping, when that reaches the center of my screen, that's when I start adding some more throttle again. So let's do that again. Float, wait for it, wait there, apply throttle, catch. So same on this side, go through, initiate the power loop, float, wait for it, catch. So I was a little bit closer to that, so the catch had to happen a little bit later. But that's kind of when you apply that throttle to catch yourself getting through that power loop. So that's it. That's kind of the 4 things that you need to consider. And so I'll talk you through exactly what I'm looking at when I do a power loop, but I'll do it real quick. So level, I'm 90 degrees, I initiate, horizon, cut back, wait for it, in the center, catch and go. So I cut back a little bit before the horizon there. That's why I was so close to the object I was power looping. I could have done that better, so let's try that one more time. So let's get back here, fly through, punch, pull back, cut and catch. Fly through, cut, and yeah, my momentum wasn't good there. Try this again, fly through, punch, pull back, horizon, cut, float, and catch. So those are the things that I kind of look at. And these are pretty big objects, but let's say we only wanted to power loop one of these beams. So we actually need to do a pretty narrow power loop, which kind of flicks us through here and around. So you would do the exact same thing, but it will take just a little bit more finesse and figuring that out, but the same thing applies. So fly through, around, there's the horizon, cut back, catch. So you can do that exact same thing. Okay, I got a little bit closer, let's fly it back. Let's try this approach again. So horizon. Sorry, when I focus I tend to go a little bit quiet, so if I'm not talking while I'm doing this, it's just because I'm focusing. So that's pretty much it, really. So let's do a little bit of free flying. And oh wait, there's one more thing to take into consideration. So this power loop is mostly if it is a fairly narrow object. Like this is a pretty narrow object, right? These 2 beams, especially the one beam that's super narrow. So this power loop will work really well for that. Now what if you wanted to actually power loop something like this hanger? So because it's a long object, welcome Ice Cold Climax, welcome to the lobby. If you are on the stream, let me know in the comments. I'd love to know if you are watching the stream. So if you are power looping, let's say this hanger, it's a much longer object, right? So there's something else you need to take into consideration when you power loop this. Because it's so long, it'll take a bit of a different technique to actually clear it. So if we did the same thing, there's your horizon cut, we don't actually clear the whole thing. So you do need to add a little bit more throttle, and more intuition and flying skills kind of comes in here. But what happens here is you need to kind of guess a little bit just before that horizon's going to hit. You give it one quick punch and then you keep going around. So have a look at my left stick. So I'm jiggling my left stick. Have a look at my left stick on the screen, and just before I go into the float, look at how much extra punch I'm giving when I go through that float. So let's approach it from this side and initiate the power loop. So going through, initiating the punch, a little bit extra, and then cut back. Could have given it a bit more. That was quite quite a tight one. Let's try that again. So let's shoot through here. Initiate, a bit more. That was a tight one again. I need to do a better job here. Let's go again, a bit more, cut back with the horizon, and there we clear it. Again. There we go. So at the end of the power loop, I will add one quick burst of a bit more throttle to make sure that I clear this whole object. Now if you do it a bit too late like I did there, you're actually going to start flying down and you need to catch yourself much quicker because you are going to hit the ground. So definitely come and practice that in here if what you are power looping is a big object. Now I wasn't actually thinking of doing this part of the video because I really want to create another tutorial video that I'll be uploading. But basically, once you can do this and you can consistently nail those power loops, then you can start adding variations into it. And those variations is really where it gets awesome. And I've got some cool ideas for videos on how we're going to work on those variations. Welcome to the lobby, Crispy. Same thing, if you are watching the live stream on the GetFPV YouTube channel, please let me know in the comments, that would be great. But once you've kind of mastered the power loop and you can consistently clear the object, catch yourself again and go through it, you can start adding two more things. And those two more things are what really sets, the intermediate freestyle pilots apart from the advanced freestyle pilots. The advanced freestyle pilots, they kind of incorporate this next section into most of their flying. And so that is adding both proximity and tricks. So there are so many different tricks that you can do with power loops. So when you get to the top and you float, you can add in a roll and then catch yourself again at the bottom. And let's do it this way. So as you get into the float, do a roll and then catch yourself again on that power loop. So I went a little bit high there, but you kind of get the point. So the roll is one cool thing to do. And while we let me mention one more thing this is a little bit off topic. It's not so much related to power loops, but it's more when you have a high camera angle. So it's just what your flying looks like. And basically, if I yaw, this is my yaw, you can see how that reacts, and this is my roll. So yaw and roll, as I'm looking towards the horizon, this is my roll, and this is my yaw. You can see it kind of affects it quite differently from when your camera angle is low. So if I just had to do a straight roll without applying any yaw input at this high camera angle, this is what it's going to look like. So you kind of look down towards the ground. When you're upside down at 50 to 60 degrees camera angle, you're going to look down towards the ground. So I didn't add anything but roll there, and that's what it looks like. And that doesn't always look the cleanest in freestyle flying. So what you want to do is you kind of want to apply a little bit of yaw as well. So when you're rolling to the right, you want to add yaw to the left, and when you're rolling to the left, you want to add yaw to the right. So sticks out together and sticks in together. So what that does is it kind of keeps the horizon in the center of your screen. So let me show you what happens. So again, normally without yaw, and this is with yaw. So it kind of just evens out what that looks like, and it makes it look a lot cleaner. So when you are doing the tricks with a high camera angle and you want to, let me show you what I mean. I'm going to not apply yaw on this power loop. So that's what, it's very confusing. That's what that looked like without yaw. It looks dirty. But when I do a roll at the top of my float with those controls like that, you can see what that looked like. Much, much cleaner. So that's just something to take into consideration, especially when you start adding these tricks. So let's just focus on that trick today. I'll do another video where I go over a lot more tricks, but at the top of your power loop and your float, you just want to add a roll. Okay? So that's only adding a trick. Then the next thing we can do is add proximity. And I think I'm going to jump onto another map to kind of show you guys what I mean by that and just the type of stuff that you can do when you start adding those in. So thank you guys all for joining this lobby. Let me jump out to change the track to a different one, and it's going to be on Hanover Park, I believe. Multiplayer lobby, create a new lobby, feel free to join there again. If you guys have any questions, the chat's quiet, please put questions through. Is my chat even working? If my chat's working, can somebody just post a comment on there? I just want to see that I am getting those chat messages. I'm not sure whether it is actually working or not. Create a new room. Yep, let's do Hanover. Free flight. Create room. What's the max? 6 players max. Okay. So let's start this on Hanover Park. Awesome. Thank you for that, B4T0G. Thanks for that. So chat's working. That's all good. Now let's quickly have a look at some of the flying at Hanover Park that we can do here for the proximity Powerloops. Again, I will do an entire video on this specifically and an entire stream on this specifically, but I really like to use these objects for the proximity Powerloops. And you may have noticed on the video, the Powerloop video, it was in the intro, but this just adds a whole new thing to it. So there's 2 areas where you can kind of practice your proximity, and that is to go through this hole. That's one, and actually doing a power loop and a trick combination through that hole. And the other one is this section over here kind of gives you a little bit to work with. There's a small gap at the back here which you can drop into, which makes your power loop a little bit different because you need to catch yourself. You need to catch yourself at the end to hit that gap. So let's go through this first variation, and that is using these. Now, what you want to do to add proximity into it is you can initiate your power loop and then hit that gap. So it's not easy, but with a bit of practice, you should be able to get it. And the goal is to try and consistently get it. So I didn't make it through both there, but that is a way that you can practice your proximity power loops, because you need to now look at more than just one object to fly through, which is usually the bottom, this bottom section, and then you initiate your power loop. So now you also need to look at actually hitting this gap with the power loop. And once you're able to actually hit that gap as well, you can add a roll into it and split the yaw stick and the roll stick to make it look smooth. And then let's see if I can get this right. And this is hopefully what you would be left with. Okay, I didn't catch it quick enough there, but that's kind of what you would be left with. So power loop through it and catch. So that's an awesome one to be practicing too on this section. And moving on to these over here, if you want to practice some more proximity and trick power loops. So let's just get this initiated. Same thing, you can go back, add another one. I'm going to do that right. Let's try this again. I just need to focus a bit. Just give me a sec. What's going on here? Okay, so you can add another roll into as you are floating. Didn't punch that hard enough. I need to practice this too. But you can do that as well. So as you are floating over it, you just add an extra roll and then catch yourself and get through it. So that's another good one to practice. But that's pretty much it for the power loop and the proximity. I'm not going to go into it more on this video, but if you guys have any questions, please post them now. I'll just do some free flying for the next 2 minutes, and then I'll keep a close eye on the comment section So please let me know if you have any questions on the Powerloop, and I'll answer those. Let's see if we can knife edge this. Nope. Let's try that again. That was dirty. That wasn't great. Any questions? Nope. That worked. Okay, it doesn't seem like we have any questions coming through. That's all good. I mean, we only had about, I think at the peak there, 10 viewers on this live stream. So hopefully we can get some more on the next one. But if you guys do have any other questions, leave them on the FPV Academy How to Powerloop video. I try and answer all those questions. Yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this live stream. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.